Well, hello and welcome to an Adams and Reese webinar discussing privacy and security as part of Cybersecurity Month in October. My name is Jack Pringle, and I am an attorney with Adams and Reese in Columbia, South Carolina. And with me, I'm pleased to have with me Catherine Taylor and Kevin Painter of Dominion Energy. And we're going to have a conversation about the way in which Dominion Energy in particular is managing all the kinds of technology and laws and requirements and corporate ethics and other considerations that go along with all of these amazing tools that customers and the company may use to communicate and to do their business in a number of jurisdictions. Let me start out, Catherine and Kevin, by having you just introduce yourselves a little bit and telling everybody a little about Dominion Energy and what your roles are with Dominion Energy. And we can start with you, Catherine, if you want.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Jack, and thanks to Adams Reese. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. Yeah, my name is Catherine Taylor. I'm an attorney with Dominion Energy. I've been practicing for a number of years in the energy industry. Started my career in private practice for a few years, followed by a stint at the Public Service Commission as a staff attorney. And then joined the company that was acquired by Dominion Energy just a few years ago here. In my time, though, working for a utility company, I have practiced in the area of regulatory law, both state and federal, State Public Service Commission and FERC regulatory law, and have, for a number of years, have worked with Kevin in the compliance arena. Compliance related not only to regulatory law and the requirements placed on utility companies, but also importantly in the privacy arena, an area, of course, that continues to grow and is of great importance to consumer and customer serving companies like utility companies.
Okay. How about, what would you add to that, Kevin, with respect to what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. As Catherine said, we've been working together, I guess, for the last 15 years or so doing compliance work, and principally on the privacy side, really been doing privacy-focused work now for the last 5 or 6 years for the company, and now I've expanded that into Dominion Energy. But yeah, just the background that I bring to the table is more of the auditing and controls background, more of the program management piece to pair along with Catherine's skills.
Okay, well, let's jump in based upon what you do and what your roles are. Let's jump into a little bit of that discussion. Talk, if you will, a little bit about what it's like, some of the challenges that you face, given that Dominion Energy is a regulated public utility, a utility that is regulated by a number of public service commissions or public utility commissions and has a lot of specific requirements, as well as Dominion Energy that operates in a number of different jurisdictions, not just that you're a regulated utility, but there are different state and federal laws that may apply. What kind of challenges are you seeing, especially in a fast-moving technology economy that we live in now? I know that's a broad question.
I'll start, Jack, and just talk a little bit about Dominion Energy, which currently serves in 20 states in the United States. Again, primarily an energy-focused company, electric and gas service to retail and wholesale customers. And as you know, given the footprint of the company, it's exciting and challenging to keep up with all of the legal and regulatory requirements across the jurisdictions of Dominion Energy. I think that's an ongoing challenge for people like Kevin and myself on a daily basis. Not only do we have to balance, as you mentioned, the requirements of the regulatory bodies that primarily oversee the basic services of the energy companies and the operating companies of Dominion. The public service commissions, for example, the federal agencies that focus on, the important service of electric and gas to customers and the protection of customer information there. We also have to balance those interests and needs with the growing area of privacy laws and regulations. And sometimes there is a little bit of a tension between the interests of those laws and regulations. Ultimately, it comes down to protection of information of the customer, but it is challenging and takes energy to keep up with those laws and regulations from that perspective.
Sure. What would you add to that, Kevin?
I would agree with that. There's so many layers of laws at the state level and potentially at the federal level, along with the different state public service commissions. You've got layers of different requirements that you have to keep up with. And really the biggest thing right now within the last several years is just keeping up with it all. So there's so much change and such a fast pace of change.
Right. Well, with that in mind, what kinds of considerations come into play when you and your functions and your programs are seeking to educate your employees with respect to the laws that may apply, whether it's for customer communications or whether it's maintaining information or whether it's any number of types of transactions? What do you think about when you have such a broad task? You want to take that one first, Catherine, or if you want to try, which one of you wants to take that one, maybe?
Either or.
Okay, give us some of your thoughts on that then, Kevin.
As far as the training aspect of it,
yeah,
and education, I mean, I think that is one of the biggest challenges. First of all, is just building a sensitivity in the employees about these issues. Since it is a growing area, it's changing kind of exponentially as far as what the requirements are. It's tough for us to keep up with it. Obviously, it's tough for the employees to understand what their role and responsibility is when it comes to these kind of things. So, a lot of training and awareness that we do throughout the year is really focused on reaching out to the various business units that we partner with that have some type of responsibility when it comes to customer information or communications, and really kind of building that dialogue up throughout the year, having discussions at staff meetings, having in-person or webinars such as this at staff meetings, again, just to kind of educate on a one-on-one basis. And that's more of the awareness campaign that you would pair along with more of the formal training that a company might do. But I think for us, the biggest benefit that we see when it comes to education is that more of the one-on-one kind of in-person training that we do.
Yeah, and I guess I'll follow up and narrow it a little bit, and especially since we live in a world of such a fire hose of information that we're all being told we need to be trained in this, or we need to learn this new skill or this new law or this new practice or this new piece of software or this new platform. How do you keep in mind trying to keep from overwhelming employees with too much information, too many emails about this policy or this requirement? What works in that framework?
I'll just add, I think, again, it's more of a relationship building and letting folks know that there are resources like Catherine and myself that exist to help walk them down the path of compliance. And, we're not really expecting every employee to be a subject matter expert on every piece of law or regulation that exists regarding privacy. What we are doing is, again, building more of a sensitivity for folks to say, okay, they recognize that there might be an issue here, and to contact, regulatory compliance or legal to get further assistance. I think that's where you're going to get the most bang for the buck, is just putting things out there that trigger people to think, okay, this is something I need to stop and slow down on, and really get some further analysis done by people who are more subject matter experts on it.
I'll add to that, Jack. Really well said by Kevin. And you know, practically speaking, for companies, for employers to be able to have a whether it's part of your legal department, a freestanding but associated compliance department, or that has a privacy component, or a privacy department in and of itself, for there just to be a point to which employees can turn with questions for guidance, advice, and tools, you know, from a very practical perspective, is really important, I think, in the world we live in today. And to go back and pick up on the points that Kevin was making about training and your questions on that, you know, certainly training to be provided by your privacy folks or by your legal department or from outside resources. Just like you said, it's a careful balance not to overwhelm employees with the basic tenets of privacy considerations and the specifics of the privacy laws and regulations. So I think it takes careful planning for whomever bears that responsibility to meet out the needs and focus on the core business. You know, where are your privacy risks, your touch points, so that you can tune that training to the company's areas of risks and concerns, and associate that for employees so that they apply it in their day-to-day jobs. It just takes, anyway, the point is, it just takes careful planning and thought, a hard look at your business, and it does take some amount of resources to be able to support that important training component.
Great points. And I'd add, just from having been involved in some of the training that Dominion Energy is doing, that one measure of, well, I would say that the training that I've been involved in is effective, but I don't necessarily mean this, but that one measure of effectiveness would be the feedback from the business people with additional follow-ups, like look at this particular situation, or consider, you know, this particular scenario. And as opposed to instances where everybody says, fine, we're fine, thanks, and then they go back to their business. So yeah. I think that's, you know, that's a pretty good measure.
Yeah, I agree. Kevin and I, you know, certainly discussed that, you know, and I think we've shared with you, you know, your training's effective and your program is effective when your phone rings a lot and you get a lot of emails and you get follow-up questions, and then people are engaged, and that's a very good sign.
Good.
Yeah, there's a lot of organic growth to that. I think that's a positive.
Yeah, and I think that's and we won't have to, is a good measure of that success, is when the light goes on, when somebody actually goes to one of you or someone else in your functions and says, we may want to consider this law or this process before we do a communication or a campaign of some type. So, well, turning to another area that is very, very important for customer privacy and information security and protecting critical assets, you know, all of which are critical missions for Dominion Energy. Talk just at a very high level about the way in which Dominion Energy assesses vendors or third parties with whom Dominion Energy is going to do a campaign, or is going to do some sort of communications, or who is going to partner with Dominion Energy and to do some critical function. Who wants to take that one?
I'll start. I know Kevin is really has a good bit of expertise on this, and so I'll turn it over to him. But I will say that the company does, not only for good business practice purposes, but also for regulatory purposes and certain requirements from our regulators, have in place a third-party risk management process that provides a policy-driven, supported, resource-supported process by which the company examines and assesses vendors and third parties with which we do business to assure a variety of security considerations, and certainly along with that process, the protection of information. And I'll stop there and let Kevin go forth.
Thanks, Catherine. I think just to really take what we just talked about, Jack, about building relationships and making sure people have enough sensitivity to issues to at least bring up the issue to get reviewed. I think the same thing with third-party risk management is ensuring that everybody in the business who's actually having these interactions with vendors understands that there is a process and that they need to follow these processes. I think that's a key component of it, because relationships with vendors in some cases could be managed by your more corporate kind of strategic purchasing group. In some cases, it could be done through your IT group for IT infrastructure stuff, and in some cases, it's kind of one-on-one purchasing or use of vendors between the more operations group and the vendors. So there's a variety of ways where a company might engage third parties. And I think the first part is trying to build an enterprise program that really has some type of central point that all of these different places go to ensure that the third party risks are actually appropriately measured and mitigated. So I think that's the first key, is really building that sensitivity and getting people to actually review that risk. And then, utilization of different tools within your third-party risk management program, again, to consistently gauge the risk that the vendor poses, to consistently get the same type of metrics from the vendors about how they manage security, how they manage confidentiality of customer information, and making sure you set up that process so that you're consistent from one vendor to the next. I think it's very important.
Right, and it's undoubtedly and Dominion Energy has been managing third-party risk for a very, very long time. This is not something that came about just as the result of some new privacy law or security standard, but there are elements of it that are certainly a little bit novel to the business people, and learning to recognize that personal information, for example, or sensitive information is protected under various laws, and that there may need to be mention or at least recognition of that type of information as an asset, somewhat
Right.
similar in the same way that cash is, or critical assets or critical infrastructure. So that's a process for sure.
Yeah, and I'll just add to the privacy. There's privacy risk now that the different new pieces of law are kind of introducing. In California with the CCPA, the concept of a service provider. So making sure that the contracts with the vendors, as you're looking at this third-party risk management, making sure that you look at the contracts to ensure that there's the right provisions within the contracts so that you can meet the service provider exceptions. Things like that are things that also need to be folded into your third-party risk management program.
Great points, great points. Well, another admittedly very broad question, but talk a little bit about the way Dominion Energy is performing, both sending and receiving and interacting with customers, customer communication in the digital age, the ways in which Dominion Energy is continuing to stay in touch with its customers.
Sure, I'll be glad to start with that. I think as every company is struggling with COVID-19, you've got less interactions in person. Our companies are different than that. We are interacting a lot more with our customers digitally. There's a lot more interactions, via email, via apps. We've got an app for our company now, so folks can download that onto their devices and interact with us. So customers are much more interested in interactions like that than they are interacting with folks, one-on-one in kind of the brick and mortar customer service offices. So, I think we're no different than any other, consumer-facing company. We definitely are trying to leverage those digital communications a lot more than we have in the past.
Okay. Anything you want to add to that, Catherine?
Yeah. No, I agree with everything Kevin said. And just, utility companies, as many others, have gone from, rendering a bill on a monthly basis and answering a customer service line, not so many years ago here, to interfacing through a variety of means, through the internet, through smartphones. And so as you increase your platforms, obviously, you increase your areas of legal considerations, risks, regulation, and that increases your your breadth of your privacy considerations and your training needs.
Sure. And a similar sort of question, and you may have already sort of covered some of it, but what are the kinds of things that Dominion Energy does to help inform and educate consumers and customers about their rights with respect to their information, whether it be sort of in the privacy context or the security context?
I can start with that, Kevin, and then let you pick up on that from a really practical applied perspective with the customer service groups. But starting out big picture, any company should, and certainly Dominion Energy does, have a privacy notice, which is sort of the governing key document that serves not only to remind employees, but very importantly to educate consumers and customers on the company's basic principles on how it treats, views, treats, and honors personal and customer information. So our privacy notice is posted on the front-facing page of the Dominion Energy website, and it is reviewed on a regular basis. And again, employees are trained to adhere to the principles of the policy and the carrying out of Dominion Energy's businesses. Within the policy, or within the notice, the policy itself and the notice, as it's referred to, there certainly is information specific to various states that have privacy notice or policy related requirements for consumers of the states. And so again, some of it is a general description of what consumers and customers can expect Dominion Energy to do, and some of it's very focused from a state to state perspective on what those customers can expect and understand from the company. Beyond that Apex privacy notice, there are policies that are developed within the company and processes to protect customer information down to the customer information systems. And with that, I'll let Kevin talk a little bit more about that day-to-day focus on information protection.
I think that's great. I mean, those are great points, Catherine. I'd say, our privacy notice itself, it does have within there all the details you just talked about, but it also provides the consumers the opportunity to contact Dominion Energy if they've got particular privacy concerns. We have stood up a 1-800 number, so a privacy office, if you will. So they've got the ability to call us, or they can email us if they've got any particular questions. And in addition to that, we've also educated the actual customer service reps who may be receiving phone calls to recognize when a customer might have a particular privacy-related question, right? So, educated customer service reps to kind of recognize buzzwords, if you will, when somebody's, really kind of shifting from just normal customer service inquiry into more of an inquiry about privacy related issues. And so they've been trained on that to offer the customer to contact the privacy office. So definitely showing that we've got specific resources devoted to the consumer to handle privacy issues. I think that's important as well. But as Catherine said, the biggest area that we leverage is our web presence, and the fact that customers are using the web and the apps a lot more. And so having that privacy notice out there and transparent, I think, is the key.
Okay.
If I say web presence enough, I'll get it right.
Yeah, well, that's good. You mentioned the California Consumer Privacy Act and its breadth a second ago. It's certainly not the only law like that, and there may be others. What are your brief observations on that? You made some comments about it, but what are your thoughts on the way privacy or customer information is held and authorized under that statute?
Sure. I mean, the CCPA, I think, really reflects in law kind of attitudes and the shift that consumers have now and their expectations. I think it's a really good reflection of what people feel like when it comes to their personal information, and the idea that personal information is a piece of property of the person, and essentially they're just letting companies like our company borrow that information for a particular use. So that shift in kind of public sentiment about their information, I think, is pretty well reflected in the CCPA. And so for companies like ours, when you take a look at the CCPA and what it requires, really just making sure that you've got kind of the back end processes to manage those types of things. For instance, do not sell or request to delete or request for information. Those are some rights that the CCPA affords California residents. Obviously, we have to ensure that we've got processes built within the company to receive those requests and to actually take action on those appropriately. So a lot of work when it comes to just setting up the processes. But I think the CCPA is probably a great test for us to get those processes set up, because I'm sure that there may be other states to follow, maybe even federal law to follow that's very similar to CCPA.
And I'll add to that, Jack. I think Kevin's right. I do think that that in many ways that particular law is a reflection of many consumers' expectations in the market today. But aside from the resource challenge that a law of that nature places on any entity, any company subject to it, I'll also add that the difficulty often comes not merely from resources and effort, but also in the application of the words in the law. And the reason I make this point, what I mean by that is, as other states or as Kevin said, the federal government move towards creating and enforcing similar laws, I think there's a real opportunity and a need for lawmakers, for stakeholders, policymakers, and enforcers to understand the perspective of a company that holds a great amount of customer information. A company like Dominion Energy understands the need to protect customer information. It's such an integral and intricate part of our basic day-to-day businesses. Mm-hmm. But unless the laws and the regulations that seek to expand privacy expectations have careful wording, careful choice of definitions, particularly careful choice of definitions framed around what the information is that the policymakers and lawmakers are designing to protect, the company will have, those subjects to the law will have a difficult time in interpreting and carrying out the intent. And so I'd say from a legal perspective, it's incredibly important to recognize how important the definitional aspects of a law and any related regulations are. You just can't take enough time really to carefully fine tune those definitions and those pieces of law. And secondly, particularly in the regulated industry arena, I think it's important for stakeholders and regulators to also understand, again, the resources required to implement those requirements. It's time consuming, and it can be burdensome from a financial or an effort perspective. It's important, it's doable, but for everybody to understand, for all stakeholders to understand the effort that may need to be applied in order to properly carry out the law along with the day-to-day business functions, I think is key.
Okay, that well said. So final question before we take some questions from the audience. There might be some folks who are listening or watching on here, and they're part of organizations that don't yet have a privacy function or something of a part of the organization dedicated to that. And I know it can certainly seem overwhelming when you have acronyms and new laws and somewhat new concepts thrown at you. What are your recommendations for standing up such a function, or at least getting started with it?
Well, to get started, if you're not there, if you have a legal department or you have an outside legal resource, that's one place to start. You've probably got somebody who's already looking at some aspect of privacy-related considerations. But I would say for businesses, as you grow into this area, be careful not to always lean too much on your lawyers for your processes is important, because like any other professional, you've got competing demands upon your time, and so lean on your outside counsel, your legal resources for your base knowledge, for your application of your laws and regulations. That's where you start. But I'll go back to what I said earlier, and that is really, I think, to have a properly functioning privacy and security part of your business, there needs to be a person or a group of people who understand that is part of their core responsibility, or that's part of their core responsibilities. And so choose first your primary business and where you interface with customers or personally identifiable information. See how that applies to your day-to-day business, and embark upon looking at creating processes that will protect that information and comply with these expectations as we've talked about today.
All right, Kevin, anything to add to that?
I would agree with everything that Catherine said. I think depending on your resources, obviously the first advice is, you're not going to boil the ocean. You need to kind of start with your highest risks first. So really leveraging a risk-based approach, I think, is obviously the first thing that you want to do. And then the other thing I would just say is just privacy itself. Defining for your company what that means. Do you have already a separate cybersecurity organization? If so, what are they doing? So distinguishing maybe roles and responsibilities between the privacy group that you want to stand up and the cybersecurity group, and making sure that you're coordinating and working with those teams appropriately. But oftentimes, a company may have a cybersecurity expert, but nothing really from a true privacy governance perspective. So just, again, understanding roles and responsibilities that you currently have, and then defining for yourself, what do you want those to look like going forward, I think is key.
Okay, well, that's good. So designate some appropriate authority, be sure to define your risk, and leverage your existing resources. Those are good signposts or starting points. And with that, let's see if there are some questions that anybody might have for the two of you. And I've got one question here that that somebody posted in the question board or the chat board. It asked the question, are you concerned about AI, artificial intelligence, and how it might change the way your organization, with the way Dominion Energy communicates with customers? And I guess one way of asking that is that a technology that is on the horizon at all for whether as a chat bot or some mechanism to help Dominion Energy with managing information? Do either of you have a thought on that? And I might add that I think Catherine and Kevin, we lost their video, so they're still on by phone, or at least I hope they are.
Yeah, can you hear me, Jack?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yeah, the video's gone out, but hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, as far as the use of AI, I'm not sure if that's the perspective of the question or not, but we're utilizing AI a lot more in our interfaces with customers. So trying, one of the things that customer service is always trying to do is get to what the customer wants in the most expedient manner possible. So typically what that means is in the customer's expectations these days is to limit the amount of kind of live discussion with a customer service agent. So, a lot of people are okay with the computer interface, and certainly the company's okay with the computer interface because it reduces the cost and expense of live customer service agents. So we are using various AI initiatives to kind of help streamline the customer service experience. And naturally with that, there comes the risk associated with ensuring that you've got proper, ID validation methods in place and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure if that's what the chat question was about, or if I've missed the point.
No, I think, yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
I'm sorry, Jack. This is Catherine. I'm still here too. And I just was going to add just briefly to what Kevin said. If the sort of the reverse of that was the intent of the question, and the company's, is the company concerned with, users of our systems, or consumers, or those who are acting as if they are consumers, using AI to try to mine information out of the systems, perhaps inappropriately. I would say that is a concern. Utility companies, as I'm sure the audience knows, they spend millions of dollars in cyber protections for all of the various systems of the company, and as artificial intelligence and those types of means grow, the protections will continue to increase. Cybersecurity is a primary activity of utility companies in the world we live in today, and so it's always on the forefront. I'm certainly not a cybersecurity professional, but I will say, as utility companies are being encouraged by regulators to make consumer platforms more available, more open, more accessible to third parties on behalf of the customer, who maybe have additional services that the third party wants to offer the customer that are related to the basic energy services of the utilities. Those threats can become very real. There's probably a role for artificial intelligence, but it's got to be managed and carefully guided through appropriate cybersecurity mechanisms to assure that people's information is protected properly.
Perfect. And we got another one here from Jeff Wheeler, a friend, and appreciate the question and the participation here. It's thoughts on how best to reconcile the tension that sometimes forms between a business's need for agility, and to be able to move quickly and efficiently, with the requirement to implement a foolproof data security implementation, so that individuals aren't always trying to work around or shortcut processes or you know, guardrails in order to meet business needs. And I guess another way, that's a great way of saying, you know, there's always this tension between security and convenience. And it's not just with customers, it's also with people inside Dominion Energy and even the people who implement those processes. So at a sort of a high level, do you see this, and is this something that you have to be aware of, that, you know, the need for speed has to give way sometimes to thoughtful, you know, application of process?
Hey, this is Catherine. I will say to date, my view, at least on the energy industry in the Southeast and the Eastern United States, is that we have to date enjoyed a relatively moderate rollout of, you know, of this experience, and exactly what what our questioner is asking there. Other industries, I think, have a greater attention. It's, you know, greater expectations and time and speed and beating people to the market in highly competitive industries, more highly competitive industries. That's not to say, though, that I think the energy, or specifically the utility industry, should rest comfortably. All the while and all the time, speed is increasing and expectations are certainly increasing, and we need to keep up with that and need to keep up with consumer expectations. But to date, we've had time. There's a lot of expense, I think, that companies undertake, but as we grow our IT resources and assets, we're increasing our speed. Kevin, do you have additional thoughts on that?
I think you hit it on the head, Catherine. I think those are all great points. I would say maybe in addition to that is that, you know, depending on the sector that you operate in and how big your company is, you know, a lot of times there is tension kind of just created by organizational hierarchy. You know, if you don't have a separate, you know, officer or you know, senior manager in a company that's specifically focused on data privacy, you know, kind of separate from your maybe IT operations or separate from your, you know, cybersecurity group, you've got maybe people wearing multiple hats. You know, it's very difficult to kind of choose which path to go. And I think it's good to have a delineation of those functions, you know, IT, cyber, and privacy, to ensure that each one of them gets the attention that they deserve. But you know, ultimately, again, going back to building relationships is, I think as long as everybody has a good understanding of what the requirements are well ahead of time, I think that makes all the difference in the world. You know, kind of privacy by design concepts versus, you know, people always coming to the end of a project and then realizing they need to check the box on some data privacy issue, which I think that always creates tension. So, you know, building an expectation again at the very beginning, then, like I said, to the degree possible, having some segregation of duties and responsibilities, so there is a little bit of you know, kind of arm's length going on there.
Yeah, and I would echo that, just to say that the relationship building is an important part of it, such that as the lawyer or the privacy function, you're not always coming off like, for lack of a better term, like a traffic cop, like saying, you're gonna, this campaign, you're gonna need to stop right here, right now. See, and there's this law, you know, and you're not always viewed as an impediment or an obstacle of stopping something, because you've been consistently educating and flagging these sort of issues and working with those business units over time to try to help them craft and steer towards compliance, and not just popping up at the 11th hour and getting in the way of something that was about to go out or to be published.
Yeah.
But great question. I think we still got a little bit of time. Anybody else on the phone or in the, what do we call this, on the platform have any more questions for the group? Thanks for the questions that were already put up here. We got, speak now. Any final words, Catherine and Kevin, on these topics as we wrap it up?
Yeah, no, Jack, this is Catherine, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk, continue to talk with you and share thoughts with the audience. Although the utility industry is obviously a particular segment with particular requirements to focus on that in some ways may not be applicable to other industries. At the same time, when it comes down to privacy and respect for customer information and the management thereof, your internal systems and policies, it's very similar to many other industries. And I hope this has been helpful. I think opportunities to talk like this and have forums to appropriately discuss ways to manage through privacy expectations are very helpful to in-house privacy personnel like Kevin and myself. And again, as I said earlier in the conversation, your outside lawyers and specialists, legal specialists are a great asset in guiding you through the growing requirements in the privacy arena.
Appreciate that. And what about you, Kevin? Any final thoughts?
I'd echo what Catherine said, and I would just add it. I also appreciate the opportunity to talk with the group, and this was very beneficial to myself, and always glad to talk through these issues. Thanks, Jack.
Good. And I'll just, close by saying thanks to everybody who got on and participated and asked questions. And I think I would echo what Kevin and Catherine said in terms of trying to collaborate and share and to learn more about and share the challenges that companies are facing. I'm seeing that collaboration and information sharing, especially in the information security context, is becoming more and more important. It doesn't mean that you're sharing trade secrets or proprietary methods, but some of the biggest competitive companies in the world in various types of industries, including utility industry and financial services, share information about threats and best practices, recognizing that the challenges, while certainly some of which are unique to a particular company, a lot of these things have happened to lots of different companies and industries, and it's really important to learn, especially when you're in such a new area and there's not a track record or a textbook you can look back to. And I just leave you with what Kevin and Catherine said in the presentation about the importance of trying to make your approach a planned one rather than a reactive one where you can. Identifying risk, devoting resources, and then working to manage it with a combination of people and processes and appropriate technology. And in my experience, and I'm sure in theirs too, that makes the privacy or security function a little less overwhelming and a little bit more manageable on a day-to-day basis, even when the software and hardware you're using is going to be replaced by the time you implement a particular policy or make certain changes. And with that, if there's no more questions, and it appears that there aren't, I appreciate everyone's participation in the webinar, and I hope you go out and enjoy the rest of Cybersecurity Month, and we look forward to seeing you soon.